Greetings, everyone. My name is Dr. Jay Singh, and I'm the founder of Publication Academy, your online training partner for higher ed career advancement and professional development. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today for this installment of our Career Pathway series, Exiting Academia. Today, we have a fascinating interview with Dr. Shantala Hari Das, who successfully transitioned from completing a PhD in biology into the exciting industry vertical of healthcare. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Over now to our amazing Publication Academy interviewer, Dr. Gertrude Nantra.
Hello everyone, Dr. G. Nantra here, and I'm so excited to be interviewing Dr. Shantala Hari Das. Welcome, Shantala.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you today. So, Shantala, tell us a little bit about your educational background and what led you to choose a career outside of academia.
That's a great place to start. So my educational background has taken place in 3 different countries. Initially, I did my schooling in India, and as I was entering high school, I realized that I really had an affinity for science. I enjoyed it. It was one of the subjects I looked forward to, especially biology. So I did an undergraduate in life sciences and biochemistry, which is really just a foundational introduction to a lot of different topics in life sciences. I then did a master's in medical genetics, in all honesty, without truly understanding the implications, the scope of medical genetics. It was a course that was accessible to me, close to home. And most importantly, it gave me an opportunity to do a 6-month fellowship in any research institute of choice, which was largely one of the driving forces in me choosing this course. And along this way, I realized that I really enjoyed research. I liked being in the lab. I liked that problem-solving aspect of research. I liked the community as well in academia. So after doing a little bit of a stint as a researcher, I decided that I wanted to pursue my PhD. Let me say here that this was not a decision I made lightly. I knew that it was going to be challenging. I knew that PhD was not a kind of smooth sailing course. And I knew that it was also going to be an extended period of study for about 4 years. So I went in fully prepared that research is what I wanted to do, with all its pluses and minuses. And so I moved to Singapore to do a PhD in behavioral neuroscience. Here again, I want to say that I actually went to Singapore intending to study a mental health disorder because neuroscience was my area of interest. But when I was kind of interviewing for the labs, I realized that lab wasn't the best fit for my personality and the kind of workspace I wanted. And I found an absolutely stellar PhD supervisor who was new to the department. He had just set up his lab. I was his first PhD student, and a lot of things fell into place. So I ended up doing a PhD in behavioral neuroscience, and I absolutely loved it. It was truly one of the most fun and liberating experiences in my career. But along the way, I have this habit at the end of every chapter, I kind of take a pause and I ask myself, where am I and where do I want to be? And I realized that as much as I loved what I was doing, I wanted some aspect of science that had a little bit more of a tangible, impact outcome. So then I moved to Canada, to McGill University, to do a postdoc in a lab which was bridging 2 very interesting areas. So they had a neuroscience team, but they also had a team who was kind of looking at large genomic data sets, mental health. And so I thought, wow, this is great because this allows me to kind of carry my neuroscience, the love of neuroscience forward with little more tangible implications than what I was doing in my PhD, which was very kind of sort of abstract. It was more of an, animal or a rodent modern driven behavioral neuroscience. So that was a little bit about my trajectory as a researcher. And as a lot of people do at the end of your postdoc is or even I did this midway through my postdoc, I really took stock of myself. I said, okay, like this is sort of when you're really venturing into the real world, so to speak, right? You kind of think, what is my job? What do I want to do? So I was brutally honest with myself because I realized that at this point, if you want to find a job that you love, you really have to be kind of really honest with yourself. So I asked myself, what do I love doing without any of the biases of what people think I should do just because I have a PhD and a postdoc, I have published papers, I work in a big research group. But what is it that really kind of I enjoy doing? What am I good at doing also? So both of these questions is what I asked myself. And I did this, it's not something that you can ask yourself and half an hour later you have an answer about what is your career path. I did this a few times, repeatedly. And at this point, I hadn't yet started talking to other people, which is something I kind of would advise. But just in terms of my journey, just for myself, so I realized that I like thinking about science. I like kind of exposing myself to a lot of different aspects of science, not necessarily just my research project. But I also felt that I felt very strongly that, research shouldn't be limited to the four walls of your laboratory. We should periodically as a community ask ourselves, what is the impact of what we are doing? How is it really kind of influencing society? So I felt that was, an area I really was interested in. So slowly as I was doing this introspection, I realized that I think the ideal place for me to be would be to move away from doing active research myself, but to facilitate research. And if I'm being honest, when I first started this journey, I didn't even know what was the job title I was looking for. And I think this is something that a lot of, PhD students, postdocs, science professionals, this is, I think, a lot of times a challenge we encounter. We know what we are interested in. We are not sure if this even can be a career. We don't know what is the job we are looking for. So this is when it really helped me to start, kind of talking to other people, like just kind of looking at other people who are doing jobs that are interesting and seeing what is the job profile that they have. So this was the next step. And so, slowly I got the confidence that yes, I can make this move out of doing active research myself. This is a career. This is, where all of my trainings would still be really useful and accessible. And so about 5 years ago, I made the shift out of, doing active research myself. And I moved into first as an associate director and then as an executive director for a not-for-profit organization in India. So I moved from Canada to India. And this had a really broad mandate of, enabling the research community in India. And for someone like me who had such a broad set of interests, I thought this was perfect because it enabled me to kind of get a sense of science communication. Gave me a sense of, working with skill building for researchers. What are the policy requirements, So it really enabled me to work with researchers, government, industry, science professionals across the board. And I think for me, this was an ideal first step away from doing active research myself to like promoting research. And this also gave me, it was a fantastic networking opportunity. And I think sometimes if you're taking your first step out of research, try to pick something where you can network, where you can meet a lot of people in your community, because that helps you slowly kind of refine your idea of what you want to do. And late last year, I moved back to Canada again. And right now I work at CGen and the Hospital for Sick Children. So CGen is Canada's genome sequencing platform. We do genome sequencing for a wide range of uses, right from precision medicine to mining to conservation. And a lot of my skills from my previous job, of being able to talk to researchers, being able to communicate with funders, being able to, package and translate science for a variety of audience. have come so in handy in my current job. So maybe I'll take a pause here. I don't know if my answer
No,
has
that was
run
so
too long.
brilliant. It was brilliant. I loved every bit of it, right? Like you took us through that whole journey. And I think that's fantastic. That's what people need to see, that this thing doesn't just happen overnight. I love what you said when you said, I asked myself the question, and it's not like 30 minutes later you have the answer, right? And then you went ahead and actually explored what that could look like, including moving back home and working within, scientific policy and nonprofits, and then coming back to Canada to work where you're working. So I think that what you're demonstrating here is just how versatile our degrees are, and how you shouldn't really lock yourself into a box. And I keep on telling, this is one message I keep on telling a lot of academics, because I think that when we become experts, so-called experts in our field, right, in the topic we're researching, we think, oh my goodness, it's going to be like such a paradigm shift to move to something else, when the reality is that you have picked up so many skills along the way that help you do that. Which brings me to my next question, right? Is what transferable skills do you think have been incredibly helpful to you in making all these like micro transitions?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question, and even identifying your transferable skills, I think, is one of the kind of steps I took along the way. So like just as a slight aside, a lot of people ask me like, do you regret doing a PhD? That's a question asked to many science professionals who are not professors, who are not in industry R&D. And I always say absolutely not. And so this comes back to your question of what are the transferable skills that were useful. And I think first and foremost is that mindset you develop while doing a PhD, which is, I think I have such a confidence in my ability. Like if I'm faced with a new challenge, a new question, I think that ability to kind of look at it from a methodical point of view, break it down into addressable pieces, and then very with a great deal of detail, kind of look at each question, think of a solution, think of what is the context. So I think breaking down questions, problem solving, and honestly that has just become such a core part of my personality. If you were to ask me what is a top restaurant to go to in Toronto, I would approach it with the same kind of due diligence. So I really think, honestly, I think that is one of my transferable skills that is really, really valuable in my current career, but also navigating the career landscape. So, problem solving, that kind of troubleshooting, communications, and I cannot emphasize this enough, having strong communication skills, both written and, in terms of public speaking. These have been some things that have really been useful in my career. And I can imagine that whichever career path you pick, these are things that are going to be very useful. Some slightly more technical aspects is, of course, having a scientific acumen, because, I was very clear that I didn't want to move so far away from, science, that I was not utilizing my ability to understand science at all. So my scientific acumen, depending on my day, some skills come into play. So like being able to kind of analyze and present data in a meaningful way, storytelling. These are some of the skills that transferable skills that I use. Another transferable skill that I use a lot and which I enjoy a lot has been relationship building. And this started right from my PhD, right from my time as a PhD student and as a postdoc, where I very actively sought, opportunities to set up collaborations with people in other countries and slightly different labs. And I really enjoyed that interdisciplinary working environment. And so that's again a transferable skill that I think is very important, because oftentimes in careers that are outside academia, you are engaging with teams who come from very different perspectives. Maybe you're in a kind of, a marketing agency, maybe you're in pharma, or in my case, I'm kind of communicating with researchers from very different fields. I'm communicating with the design department at the hospital for sick children to put together an infographic. In all these contexts, I think having that ability to form relationships, to collaborate with interdisciplinary teams is very important. So I think honestly, a lot of the skills that I learned during my PhD, during my postdoc, at their very core have been transferable, barring some, barring some few technical skills which I left behind very happily in the lab.
Absolutely. So yeah, that the great answers and great skills, right? That you're bringing up. What does a day in a life look like for you?
That's interesting, and I think that's a very important insight. We sometimes forget to ask, people when we're talking about their job. So it's a bit varied depending on the time of the year, because we have grant cycles, we have reporting cycles. But maybe to give you a little bit of a broad overview of how my day looks. So some part of it, because at the core of my job, what I try to do is I try to bring visibility to the science that has been supported by this genome sequencing platform, CGen. So I reach out to researchers. I try at least one or two in a week. I talk to them about their research. And so before I talk to them, I kind of put together a few questions so that we can cover, all the aspects that I'm interested in discussing with them. But I also keep a little wiggle room for, growth in the conversation. So there's researching, preparing questions, reaching out to researchers, then at some point putting that together as a write-up. And so this is a more kind of popular science communication style of working, which is you're kind of translating the science that's happening to a wide audience. I also do this in a more technical context, and that also happens quite periodically, which is I look through all of the researchers. We have thousands of researchers. I kind of look through what is the work that's happening and put together more technical reports. And so in this activity, there's not so much like, engagement, interaction. It's more working either independently or with the team, and drafting, more technical reports. And so then there are some kind of events that happen less frequently, which is, putting together design elements for a brochure, or putting together, technical infographics to submit to a government agency. So these are the kind of peppering of tasks that happen.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, one of the things that I know is always challenging for PhDs and academics is, where do I go and find these jobs, right? So, of course, there's LinkedIn and Indeed, and you can go find jobs there. People have found jobs there. But in your case, how did you find both the nonprofit and what you're doing now with CGen and then the Hospital for Sick Children? Talk through some of that.
Yeah, I think firstly I want to say this differs a little bit depending on which kind of niche you're going into. So I think the first step is, if you are just starting out in this process, is look at LinkedIn, look at some organization websites, identify someone who's doing a job that sort of interests you, reach out to them, ask them if you can have an informational interview. And this is what I did. I reached out to people. I had an informational interview, and I told them, listen, and this is what I'm interested in doing. I'm moving back to Toronto, in a few months. Could you suggest, or do you have any suggestions for places where I might be a good fit for, where can I start looking for a job? So that's what I did this time when I moved to Canada. I reached out to some really, really cool people in the area, and I asked them, where do you think I should look? CGen was one of the suggestions that was given to me, and so I then kind of looked up CGen on LinkedIn, and I saw that this job had just been advertised. I then connected with the then CEO of CGen to get a better sense of the job. What did it entail, to also give me a chance to explain to them what was my kind of professional profile, and then I went ahead and applied to the position. For my position at India Bioscience, which is a not-for-profit at India, it happened in a slightly different way. I had attended a meeting that they had conducted for researchers who were thinking about moving back to India. At that point, I was still kind of undecided if I wanted to continue as a researcher or not. So I had attended this meeting, and I really loved the kind of work that they were doing. And I was like, wow, wouldn't it be fantastic if I had a chance to be a part of such an organization? And so when I decided that I was kind of moving out of my postdoc, I started kind of periodically looking on the websites of a few organizations that I had listed that I really liked the work that they were doing that was adjacent to academia. And then when I saw, a posting for a position from India Bioscience, I leapt at the opportunity to apply for it. So, in short, both of these organizations were brought to my attention either through attending a meeting or through conducting, a chat with someone in the field and asking them like, hey, what do you think? Where should I look? So both through networking, if I could put it in one word.
Yeah, no, that's so wonderful. But I think both of them, you got through a combination of networking and then also just connecting with them online, which I think is perfect. Because I think one of the things that a lot of, and because I've been doing this stuff and talking to academics for a few years now, people like, I've been applying online, and I'm like, have you spoken to anybody? And people sometimes forget that there are people that work at these organizations, or people that know about these organizations, or people that know the landscape of the city or the locale, and they can give you so much more insight than you realize that you actually need. And that actually empowers you to speak authoritatively when you show up at these interviews. So I love that both of your careers or both of your jobs were, a combination of these things. So thanks for sharing that. What was the hardest part, would you say, about making this change?
The hardest part was the first step, and I a lot of people, maybe not, let me talk about myself. So somewhere midway during my postdoc, or even like maybe a year and a half in, I realized that I did not want to go down the route of becoming a faculty member and independent researcher. So that was very clear to me. But that there was such an enormous sense of fear about, taking that first step. Like, if I move out of this, is it a permanent? Will I regret it? Will I get a job? So I really think that the, f- that first bit of overcoming that fear was the hardest. And I think it was so hard because I had set myself this enormous challenge, or this enormous task of moving out of something that I had trained for, that I was comfortable in, and finding a job. I think the moment I broke it down into tiny, achievable tasks that could be done in a day, in a week, in a month, um, I gained the confidence to make that move. So whether it was just talking to people who had moved out of, doing a career in research and who were thriving, whether it was just seeing these profiles on LinkedIn and seeing, what was the job title, I think I just needed that confidence that yes, this is doable, this is achievable. So honestly, that was the hardest. And then once I had the confidence that I could do this, once I had the clarity for what I was looking for, um, then each task became kind of doable, achievable, manageable. Yeah, and then I found that I could navigate this move away from active research.
Yeah. taking that first step. That first step is always scary. I remember with my own transition from from being a postdoc to medical communications, it's like who who's even going to give me a chance? And at the time, like I really did struggle. But eventually you realize you speak to enough people, you keep applying, you don't give up, and you realize, hey, it's not as it's always the first step that's the hardest. I completely agree with that. I completely agree with that. So we're coming to the end of our conversation, which I've really enjoyed.
Could I just add one thing
Yes,
here?
go ahead.
Sorry. I was just thinking like, what about that first step was so hard? And I think, PhD holders, at least like this is how I found myself. I went from thinking that I couldn't do anything, apart from research, to learning about what transferable skills were, to then thinking I could do everything under the sun, right? So I went from saying, yes, I can do science communication. Yes, I can work in the industry in R&D. Yes, I can do regulatory affairs. Yes, yes, yes to everything. And so I think my first initial kind of temptation was to apply for every single job that had PhD as a requirement.
Right.
In which case, my CV, my resume, my cover letter, nothing was tailor made for the position, right? And later in my career, I started doing recruiting myself, and I realized that, oh my God, like if I, like you, when you start seeing these kind of applications that are not tailor made, that are not well suited, where you get a sense that the candidate doesn't have a clarity about why they're applying for this position, barring the fact that they have a PhD. So I think that was also very hard. So I think, we touched upon this a little earlier in the conversation, which was about figuring out what you want to do. So I want to tell anyone who's making this career change at any point, spend that time, really figure out what you want to do. And when you start applying for positions out of academia, out of research, start with one. Don't have that attitude that I can do everything under the sun, and so I'm going to apply for every position under
Right.
the sun.
Right. No, that's such good advice, right? And one of the things that I tell people always is choose two or three career paths, right? You can choose if you realize, oh, there's so many things, so many ways I could go. Choose to like boil it down to two or three and then create a resume for each path.
Exactly.
Because trust me, the resume you want to apply to regulatory affairs with is not the same resume you're going to apply to an R&D position with, right? It's like they're two completely different tracks. The only thing that may be common is that you have a PhD and they want to see different language in each case. So I love that you bring that up. Take the time to really be clear about what paths am I interested in and then tailor your resume towards that. Thank you for sharing that. That's very, very helpful. And so, as we land the plane, what's maybe something I haven't asked you, what's like the last thing you would say to somebody who is just like you, has your background, wants to do what you're doing? What would you tell them to do?
So there are two things I want to say. So maybe we can start with a career like in communications. And I just want to say that even in communications, in science, or in knowledge mobilization, I prefer to term it that way, there are many different avenues. So you could do, popular science writing, for a large audience. You could conduct outreach. You could be communicating with policymakers, with the government. You could be doing it in a pharma setup. So, understand the nuances. And I think this communication knowledge mobilization is a step that a lot of PhDs might be comfortable making a move to, because you've already learned some of the skills during your training. You learn how to kind of communicate, you learn how to give talks, you learn how to write, lay summaries during your PhD and postdoc. If this is something you want to move into, before you start applying for a job, maybe 6 months to a year, try to start building a portfolio. Whether that means writing once in a while for publications, try to do that. Or if it means, maintaining a personal blog where you're putting out, content, do that. Try to, what I'm trying to say is that irrespective of what step you're trying to make, try to build some evidence. They say the proof is in the pudding. So try to show that to a recruiter that, yes, I have thought about this career. I know what are the skills it entails, and see, I've already made, some initial steps into working in this space. So I think building that portfolio and demonstrating your skills, your alignment to this to a position is important. For communications, I kind of listed a few, which is, have a blog post. If you're interested in podcasting, maybe you can, try to do some, some personal podcasts, but just, venture out about half a year before you start applying for jobs in that position. That is one thing. Um, the other thing I want to say is that not just related to this career, is I really think this is a reiterative process. So don't be too scared of taking the first step. You might take it, you might realize this is not 100% what you want to do, but you will slowly start gaining that clarity, moving you towards what you want to do. It might take one step, it might take two steps. But along the way, kind of keep enhancing your skills, building your understanding of the career landscape as well.
So many gems right there, right? People don't realize how much just one of the things I absolutely loved about this conversation, Shantala, is the fact that you said have clarity, right? And I think that if anybody will, any big thing, the big thing that I took away is clarity, and I hope that people take that away from this interview. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. Thank you, Shantala.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure.